Hi, I'm Lauren Blake. 5 years ago, my family didn't just turn their backs on me. They wiped me out. They rewrote history without me in it. They mocked me, silenced me, buried me beneath their shame. And when they assumed I'd stay buried, they sent an invitation expecting a smile. But the thing about being buried alive? You learn to claw your way to the surface, and you don't come back empty-handed. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to revise the ending they tried to write for me. But before we begin, let me ask you, if your own blood erased your name, would you forgive them? Or would you fight? It had been one of those grinding days in court, where the air clings to your skin like dust and ink. When I stepped into my Charleston apartment, the light slanting in through the windows painted everything in amber and gold, trying to make it feel like home. I kicked off my heels, let them slam against the wall like punctuation, and tossed my briefcase onto the battered oak table. The mail fanned out in a familiar mess. Overdue bills, grocery circulars, a seafood coupon I'd never use. And then I saw it. A thick, cream-colored envelope, the marine crest glinting in gold. My hand paused mid-reach. The world shrank to the space between my fingers and that envelope. My chest cinched tight like invisible hands closing in. I hadn't seen that seal since the night I walked away. 5 years ago. Since Jameson raised a glass to my failure, right there in front of the entire family. I wiped my palms on my skirt as if I could scrub the memory off and finally picked up the envelope. Ridiculously formal. Gold wax seal. The kind of thing you'd expect from Buckingham Palace, not from a family that tossed you aside. My name curled across the front in precise script. Lauren Blake Marin. I slid the letter opener under the seal. The scent hit me first. Costly paper and something older. Regret, maybe. Memory. Inside, a wedding invitation so ornate it nearly sneered. You are cordially invited to the union of Jameson Marin and Catherine Walsh. My stomach pitched. Jameson, the crown prince, the legacy, the obedient son holding up the Marin name like some sacred heirloom. Catherine Walsh? The name meant nothing. Probably another photogenic placeholder to fit the family mold. I set the invitation down like it might detonate. Something else fluttered out. A plain lined scrap of paper. No seal. No embellishments. Just ink. My mother's handwriting. Messy. Rushed. Please come. I miss you. They don't know I'm writing you. Mom. The breath caught in my throat. That same mother who'd sat in silence as Jameson toasted my shame. The same mother who didn't speak when I packed my life into boxes and left. And now, this. A smuggled message, as if it were contraband. The room tilted. I grabbed the counter's edge, its marble chill, biting into my skin. Instinctively, my hand found the silver necklace at my collar, the tiny gavel charm my grandfather gave me the day I passed the bar. The only one who looked at me and said, "You're enough, Lauren, just as you are." I pressed the charm to my lips. Maybe for strength. Maybe to keep myself from falling apart. The memories hit like shrapnel. Thanksgiving. 5 years ago. Jameson, tipsy and venomous, clinking his glass against Dad's, voice slashing through the room. "She thinks she's better than us now," he said. Trading stethoscopes for subpoenas, trading family for strangers' applause. What a disgrace. Laughter, coughs, silverware scraping over bone china, and Mom, eyes damp, mouth sealed. Dad? He wouldn't even look at me. I stood there, 29, shamed like some kid dragged in front of the school. No one spoke. No one stopped it. So I left. Packed what I could fit, drove off without looking back, until now. I blinked, pulling myself back. The invitation glowed smugly under the kitchen light. Like it knew. Was this a PR stunt? A ploy to paste me back into the photo album? Or worse, a trap? The RSVP card waited. Blank. Expectant. Part of me wanted to rip it up, dump it in the trash, where it belonged. But another part, the part that still ached during Christmas carols, that still wondered if anyone missed me, that part stirred. Not for them. For me. Maybe it was time to stop letting their silence define me. My phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. I grabbed it, thumbed open Maya's name. My constant, my compass. Typed without stopping. Maya, should I walk back into the lion's den? Paused. Hit send. The city throbbed outside. Sirens in the distance. A bass line from a passing car. Life. Carrying on. I folded the note, slipped it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my briefcase. Then I shut my eyes. Whatever came next, one thing was clear. They had no idea who they'd just invited. The question twisted in the air like smoke. Against glass. Should I walk back into the lion's den? I didn't know. Not yet. I crossed the room and opened the cabinet above the sink. My fingers found the whiskey bottle behind a dusty box of herbal tea I never touched. I poured 2 fingers into a glass, no ice, and stared down the RSVP card like it held the authority to reshape my future. One slow sip, the whiskey curling through my chest, warm and useless against the surge of memory clawing its way up. Thanksgiving, 5 years ago. I could still smell the roasted turkey, the overpriced Cabernet, the cloying blend of my mother's, perfume and candles that tried too hard to smell like autumn. The Marine estate had been overflowing as always, cousins, aunts I never liked, business partners with teeth too white. Everyone wedged into that grand dining room like extras in a high-end commercial about family. Back then, I was still finding my footing in the courtroom, weighed down by student debt like a second spine. A public defender, the most unglamorous job imaginable to the Marin clan. I showed up late, straight from an emergency arraignment, still in my courthouse clothes. Jacket wrinkled, shoes scuffed. Jameson's eyes found me the second I sat down at the far end of the table, and they sparkled with the kind of amusement that always spelled disaster. Dinner blurred. Toasts began. Dad, Uncle Mark. The usual suspects clinking glasses to promotions, new babies, zip codes that said wealth without saying it. Then Jameson rose, lifted his glass, voice smooth and slow, rich with cruelty. Some of us, he said, staring straight at me, choose to serve the community. A pause. Others choose to shame the family legacy. His smile sharp, the silence that followed sharper. A few weak laughs, some raised eyebrows, but no one intervened. I sat frozen, the turkey untouched on my plate, the warmth gone. Mom's fingers curled around her wine glass like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Dad focused on the floral centerpiece, as if it had started performing a magic trick. No one said a thing. That kind of silence screams louder than any insult. I remembered folding my napkin, slow, deliberate, setting it on my plate, and standing. Nobody moved. Nobody called after me. By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling so badly. I missed the ignition twice. I never went back, and not once did anyone ask why. I drained the whiskey in one go, the glass hitting the counter with more force than necessary. It echoed. Part of me wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, Mom's note was a fracture in the wall they'd spent years building. But the part of me that had learned the hard way, it didn't buy hope that easily. I looked at the RSVP card again, then reached for my laptop. If I was walking into that wedding, I needed to know who Catherine Walsh really was. Didn't take long. A few searches, some bios, court databases. Catherine Walsh wasn't just a pretty prop for Marin Optics. She was a sharp, principled attorney who fought for tenants, challenging landlords, housing commissions, systems rigged against the vulnerable. Then I froze. 8 months ago, one of her cases, in my courtroom, it hit me like a jolt. She'd stood before me defending a group of renters, fearless and eloquent. She'd won. At the time, there'd been no mention of Jameson, no rings, no knowing glances. Just a woman with fire in her voice and a spine made of steel. And now she was marrying the man who'd publicly shamed me for doing exactly what she did. The irony twisted in my gut like wire. Jameson, Marin heir, soon-to-be husband of a woman who probably admired the very judge he'd erased. I leaned back, arms crossed tight, heart thudding. Maybe the universe did have a sense of humor. The clock ticked forward, slow and steady. I stared down the RSVP card. This time my hands were still. I grabbed a pen. Inhale. One fluid motion. I'll be there. I folded the card with precision, slid it into the return envelope and sealed it. No ceremony. No hesitation. If they wanted a scene, I'd give them one. Just not the one they were expecting. The half-empty whiskey glass sat forgotten as I switched off the kitchen lights and headed for bed. The breeze through the cracked window carried the scent of rain and something else, something like change. Somewhere inside me, a quiet ember sparked. I dropped the RSVP in the nearest mailbox the next morning. Waited a beat longer than needed as the door clanged shut. Final, like slamming. A gate behind you, or maybe opening one. Charleston was wrapped in that gray kind of silence, the kind that promised rain but didn't quite deliver. I didn't head straight to the courthouse. Instead, I turned left, letting the city guide me like it used to. The Sigh. Family cemetery sat just beyond town, behind a wrought iron fence tangled in moss and memory. The trees whispered to one another in the breeze. As I pulled into the gravel lot, something in my chest shifted. Old grief, stirred and rising. I grabbed the lilies from the passenger seat, carefully smoothing the paper, and made my way to the corner plot up the gentle slope. There, beneath a weathered marble marker, rested the only man who had ever truly seen me. No terms, no conditions. Judge Elias Marin. Grandpa. I knelt, brushed away a leaf, set the flowers down like a promise. The engraving had begun to wear thin, but the words, his words, remained etched in my mind like scripture. Justice without fear, integrity without compromise. I rocked back on my heels, letting the silence drape itself over me. Then, from the inner pocket of my jacket, I pulled out a small, time-stained envelope I'd carried for years, but had never dared to open. It was the last thing he gave me before cancer took the force from his once thunderous voice. When you need it most, he'd said. Well, if not now, then when? I slid a finger beneath the fragile seal, careful not to tear the corners, and unfolded the single piece of paper inside. His handwriting, unsteady but still defiant, spoke like a whisper only I could hear. Real power isn't loud, Ellie. It's in standing tall without needing to push others down. You won't always be their favorite. You weren't meant to be. You were born to outgrow them. I stared at the page until the letters blurred, my throat closing tight with something unspoken. All this time I'd fought to be accepted, to explain myself to people who had never once tried to understand me. But he had. He had seen it coming, had known I would outgrow them long before I did. Sliding the letter back into the envelope, I pressed my palm to the silver gavel at my neck. The last piece of him I had left. Not a symbol for anyone else, not a badge to flash, just something that reminded me who I was. For me. A few drops of rain kissed the back of my hand, gentle and blessing-like. I stood, brushed the moisture from my skirt, and made my way back to the car. The letter tucked into my briefcase like a talisman. By the time I climbed the courthouse steps that afternoon, a quiet drizzle had taken over, soft and steady. I nodded to the bailiffs, the clerks, the ones too busy to notice. The routine of it steadied me, until a voice drifted around the marble corridor. Judge Marin. Yeah, that's her. Catherine Walsh says half her wins come from studying Judge Marin's rulings. I slowed, eyes on the docket in my hand like it suddenly required scrutiny. Catherine Walsh, Jameson's fiance, learning from me. Not Jameson, not my parents, me. The family's cautionary tale. The so-called disgrace. It was almost funny. I kept walking, face neutral, but something shifted under the surface. hardened. Every story they'd tried to build, the polished family, the chosen son, the perfect image, was balanced on the very daughter they'd cut loose. A smile, low and unamused, tugged at the corners of my mouth as I stepped into my chambers and clicked the door shut behind me. They had erased me, but I was back. And this time, they were going to remember me the hard way. The wind outside slammed into the windows, restless, like it too sensed a storm coming. And for the first time in years, I felt still. Solid. My grandfather's words clinging to me like armor as I locked my office and stepped out into the thick Charleston dusk. The humidity curled around my skin, heavy and familiar, like spring, reminding you nothing comes easy. The clouds hung low, swollen with the promise of more rain. I dropped the RSVP envelope into the nearest mail slot, my fingers brushing metal just as the latch slammed shut behind it. Final. Like closing a door. Like opening another. I didn't go back to work. I let instinct turn the wheel, let the streets guide me like muscle memory. The family cemetery sat just beyond the edges of the city, behind an iron fence tangled with moss and memory. The old oak trees whispered overhead, wind pushing secrets from one to another. As I pulled into the gravel lot, something inside me pulled tight, old grief rising like a tide. I took the bouquet of lilies from the passenger seat, fingers smoothing the paper as I made my way to the far edge of the grounds. There, beneath weather-worn marble, was the only person who had ever truly seen me, without qualifiers, without edits. Judge Elias Marin. Grandpa. I knelt, brushing leaves away from his name, and set the flowers gently at the base of the stone. The food sat untouched. It wasn't until the coffee had gone cold between us that she spoke, setting her fork down with a soft, deliberate clink. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice so quiet it barely registered. I looked at her, waited. Jameson. She paused, visibly steadying herself. "He told everyone you had a breakdown. That you left because you couldn't handle the pressure." The words didn't surprise me. But hearing them aloud scraped something raw and long-sealed. She twisted her napkin in her lap until the fabric strained. "He said it to Catherine. To everyone. And Her voice cracked. "I didn't stop him. I thought if we didn't speak about it, maybe it would just disappear." I stared at her, letting the weight of silence hang heavy between us. The restaurant's hum retreating into something distant and hollow. "You didn't protect me," I said, quiet but unwavering. "You let them bury me." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. No anger. No grief. Just the crisp edge of a truth too old to bleed anymore. With unsteady fingers, she reached into her purse and slid a small velvet box across the table. I hesitated. Then opened it. Inside, resting against the dark lining, was the pendant my grandfather had promised me after I passed the bar. Lady Justice, blindfolded, her scales finely balanced. Jameson had kept it all these years, while they erased me from their photographs, their memories, their stories. "It's yours," she whispered. It always was. I closed the box and slipped it into the inside pocket of my blazer, placing it over my heart. No thank you. No forgiveness. Some things can't be reclaimed with heirlooms and late apologies. I pushed back my chair. The legs, making a soft scrape across the floor. She flinched at the sound. "They buried me once," I said, rising. "This time I'm digging myself out. And I'm bringing the truth with me." Her mouth opened like she had something left to say, but I was already walking. I crossed the floor without looking back, the pendant a solid, steady weight beneath my jacket. Outside, the rain had thickened just enough to blur the city lights. But the air smelled cleaner, as if something old and bitter had finally lifted. I walked into the streetlight glow, every step sure, every breath fuller than the one before. The rain from the night before had dried to a lingering mist that clung low to the ground, curling around the city like smoke. I stood in front of my closet, staring. It wasn't just getting dressed. It was preparation. It was armor. Choosing who to be for the people who had already decided who I wasn't. I reached for the black sheath dress, sleek, restrained, strong without apology, low-heeled pumps, scuffed but polished. Then, the silver pendant, Lady Justice gleaming just beneath my collarbone. Not an accessory. A declaration. The drive to the Marin estate passed in a blur. Charleston unfolded around. Me, the pastel facades, the salt-washed breeze, the stir of tourists filtering through cobbled streets. But I didn't see any of it. My mind moved slow and certain, coiling in tight circles, gathering. By the time I turned into the circular drive, the parking area was already full. Luxury sedans, imported SUVs. Expensive, spotless, self-important. I cut the engine, inhaled, stepped out. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air changed. Polite smiles, measured hugs, air kisses aimed just shy of contact. The welcome you give to someone you wish you hadn't seen again. I handed off my coat to a young server in a starched jacket, moved through the entry like smoke, past portraits too familiar. Jameson as a toddler. Jameson in cap and gown. Jameson breaking ground on another family-funded institution. My absence? A perfect gap no one ever acknowledged. I found myself drifting toward the side parlor, where cousins clumped together in crystal-laced laughter. She thinks she's somebody now. One murmured, the words sticky with champagne and inherited contempt, because she wears a robe and bangs a gavel. Another chuckled. A nasal, dismissive sound. She's playing dress up. Real success? That's in the blood. I paused. Let the words wash over me, cold, familiar. But this time they didn't wound, they tempered. I turned without a word, my steps sharp, spine straight, heels ringing clean on the marble floor. The crowd had started to gather in the main ballroom. A long table sagged under the weight of overdone arrangements and overindulgent hors d'oeuvres. Champagne flowed like theater. Voices rose and twisted, tangled in old gossip and new alliances. I stood at the edge, sipping water from a cut glass. Tumbler watching without reacting. Jameson was near the fireplace, center of his orbit, spinning charm like silk. Catherine stood nearby, laughing on cue, though her eyes flicked to me, uneasy. Then, a fork tapped against crystal. The room hushed. Jameson raised his glass. That same effortless, polished grin spread across his face, the one he wore when cameras flashed. I want to thank everyone for being here, he began, voice warm, well-rehearsed. It means the world to celebrate with the people who carry the Marin name with pride. And of course, our dearest friends. Laughter, thin but eager. And of course, he continued, letting his gaze drift, land on me, just for a beat. We're grateful for all kinds of success stories, even those who think a desk and a robe are enough to replace a real legacy. Laughter again, louder, meaner. I didn't move, didn't blink. My fingers tightened on the glass until the cold bit into my skin. But still, no flinch, no retreat. He wouldn't get the reaction he wanted. I let the laughter pass over me like fog, unbothered, untouched. Then I raised my glass. Not in salute, not in concession, in promise. Never again. Never again would I let them reduce me. Never again would I quiet my truth to keep their myth intact. Never again would I stand politely while they rewrote my story for their comfort. The pendant pulsed warm against my skin. A silent oath. The rest of the evening unraveled in fragments. Small talk, forced smiles, the soft clang of silver on china. But my mind had already moved forward, toward what was coming. Toward the reckoning already unfolding. They wouldn't see it coming, not until it was far too late. The lingering chime of champagne glasses still echoed faintly as I stepped out onto the back veranda. The harbor air bit clean against my face. I needed distance from the curated warmth inside. I wasn't alone for long. Measured steps. That slow, entitled pace I'd know anywhere. Jameson. He leaned on the stone railing beside me like he owned the view, his face half-lit in terrace gold. Quite the turnout, huh? He said, swirling the amber remnants of his drink. I said nothing. Kept my eyes on the water. let him fill the silence. "You've made quite a splash yourself," he continued, mock admiration coiling through his voice. "Showing up all righteous, draped in that little pendant like it means something." Still, I said nothing. It wasn't until he let out a low, condescending chuckle that I turned to face him, my voice level, each word sharp as glass. "One more public lie about me, Jameson," I said, "and I won't stay quiet." He froze mid-sip, lowering his glass inch by inch. For a moment, the only sound was the whisper of the wind through the palm fronds overhead. Then he smirked. That same smug, tilted grin I'd known since we were kids. "You wouldn't dare," he said, voice thick with certainty. "You throw a fit and you look bitter. You stay quiet and you look graceful. Either way, I win." I let the silence swell between us, let him sit in the echo of his own arrogance. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't need to say another word, because I already knew the truth. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline the next evening, washing Charleston in a blaze of molten orange, I was pulling into the circular drive of the grand banquet hall. The place reeked of wealth. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors gleaming like still water, centerpieces so oversized they might have been barriers. The Marins never did settle. Inside, the crowd was thick with family, friends, business allies, each one dressed to impress and buzzing with the glossy excitement of curated celebration. I stepped in quietly, spine straight, the pendant at my throat catching the chandelier light just enough to draw glances. Eyes tracked me as I passed, some warm, most cautious, a few thinly veiled behind brittle pleasantries. Jameson was across the room, arms slung around Catherine like a prize he'd just claimed, grinning like a man who believed he was untouchable. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. Then he winked. That's when I knew. I found my seat, one of many at the long banquet tables, wedged between distant cousins whose names I barely recalled. A folded card sat on every plate, the evening's schedule printed in gold script. I opened mine and froze. The front was standard. "Welcome to the rehearsal dinner of Jameson Marin and Catherine Walsh." But the back? The back listed family accomplishments. A Marin tradition, and I was nowhere. Not an oversight, an erasure. Aunt Margaret's brief stint on a hospital board was printed in italics. Cousin Philip's second-place rowing trophy from 5 years ago was mentioned. Great-Uncle Charles's accounting plaque? There in bold. But me? Lauren. Harvard Law. Appointed judge at 35. Gone. The card trembled slightly in my hands, not from rage, but from the effort it took to remain composed. Across the room, Jameson raised his glass in a mock salute, the curve of his grin unmistakably cruel. Laughter swirled around me, but I heard none of it. I set the card down with care, smoothing the folds with both hands. Under the table, my fingers closed around the Lady Justice pendant at my collarbone. I closed my eyes. Let the weight of it root me, no tears tonight, no spectacle, only resolve. He thought this would silence me. He didn't realize he'd just drawn the curtain on his own finale. As the speeches began, cloying odes to Jameson's brilliance, saccharine praise for Catherine's charm, I slipped my phone from my clutch beneath the tablecloth. A single text to Maya, my constant, my steel. Ready the documents. It's time. The ping was quiet. Final. I returned the phone to my bag and lifted my water glass, slow and steady. Across the room, Jameson threw his head back, laughing at something Catherine said, unaware that the floor beneath him had already started to crack. They never see it coming. The air in the hall felt heavy, pressed in at the edges, that kind of stillness that lives just before a thunderclap. I adjusted my collar beneath the tailored jacket, the pendant cool and steady against my skin, like breath made solid. It was late spring, but the wind off the harbor had a bite, like the city was bracing for what it already knew was coming. I parked a block down from the final pre-wedding event, a formal cocktail hour at one of the Marin family's oldest connections. The estate was grand, obscene, an old plantation house, dressed up for society, string lights in the trees, the air thick with gardenias and generational wealth. Inside, the parlor was bright and busy. Waiters drifted like shadows, trays held high, laughter rising above the clinking of cut crystal. I moved through the room without friction, a ghost in a familiar house. Double takes, stiff smiles. I didn't care. I wasn't here to blend in. Catherine was easy to spot, surrounded, glowing. She looked stunning, but off, shoulders tight, smile too precise. I watched, waited. She was talking about a recent housing case, how she'd helped a family stay in their home. Her face softened, proud and real. And to think, she said, laughing, it all started with that article about Judge Lauren Marin's tenant protections ruling. It changed the way I think about advocacy. Silence followed. Just for a second. A breath of truth. Then Jameson swooped in. That? Oh, that was a novelty case, he said smoothly. You know, how some people dabble for attention. Catherine's brow pinched. She looked at me just briefly. But neither of us said a word. Not yet. An hour passed in civility so forced it could crack under its own weight. Then, someone called for the family toast, a tradition, they said. Everyone gathered by the grand piano, champagne flutes raised. Jameson stood front and center, basking like a man convinced the room would always orbit him. I moved to the front, quiet, deliberate. A manila folder pressed to my side like a lifeline. The room went still. Jameson raised his glass. And here's to family, he said, voice rich with rehearsed charm. To those who carry the Marin name with pride and honor. Polite applause fluttered through the room. They had no idea what came next. I waited until the last clap dissolved into a silence too tight to ignore, then stepped forward. No microphone, no raised voice, just presence. I laid the manila folder on the gleaming surface of the grand piano and opened it with the kind of care usually reserved for fragile things. The contents caught the chandelier's light. Headlines, magazine spreads, formal letters from the state, judiciary, commendations for community service, awards for legal excellence, glowing praise from organizations Jameson had once groveled before for their approval. All bearing my name. All things Jameson had spent years telling the family, telling Catherine, never existed. I picked up one letter, unfolding it slowly. For outstanding service in judicial equity and commitment to public interest law. I read it aloud, my voice clear, calm. The words sliced through the room like a knife through silk. Then I let silence do what it does best. I let it hang. Let it sting. Let it speak. Funny, I said, laying the letter flat against the piano, smooth and deliberate. For someone who supposedly couldn't handle life, I seem to have been quite busy changing lives. A ripple ran through the room like wind through dry grass. Heads turned, whispers sparked, and Jameson's smile, perfect, polished, invincible, cracked. Didn't look at him. I looked at Catherine. Color drained from her face like a tide pulling back before a storm. She stared at the documents, then at Jameson, then at me, and something inside her, some belief, some narrative, split wide open. You lied, she said. Not loud, but loud enough. Loud enough that the room, already hushed, went utterly still. You lied to everyone. Jameson opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Catherine didn't wait. With fingers that only trembled slightly, she pulled the engagement ring off her finger. Silence. The kind of silence that feels sacred. She didn't look at him again. She looked at me. Thank you, she said, her voice sharp and clear like shattered glass reflecting truth. Thank you for showing me who he really is. She placed the ring on the edge of the piano. The platinum caught the light and winked one final time. Then she turned and walked away. Not rushed, not broken. Free. Behind me, Jameson's voice finally cracked through the silence, frantic, fractured. But I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. The silence she left behind said more than any speech I could have delivered. And it was only the beginning. The weight of Catherine's words still hung in the air as I stepped out into the cool evening, leaving the collapsing fantasy of the Marin family behind me. The estate stood behind me, bright and brittle against the night like a lantern trying too hard. But it already felt smaller, like something had shifted in its foundation, like truth had made the walls tilt. I walked toward my car, my heartbeat steady and solid in my chest. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt free, but I knew better. Jameson wasn't finished. Not yet. By the time I reached my apartment, the storm had already started. I kicked off my heels, slipped out of my jacket, poured a glass of water. Then my phone buzzed, hard, sharp against the counter. I looked, and my stomach clenched. Headlines. Not from real outlets. No. These were tabloid slurs. Scandal blogs built on anonymous rot. Disgraced judge bullied her way into appointment. Former classmates question Lauren Marin's mental health. One after another, a smear campaign constructed. Itself in real time. Careful, not quite libel. Just slimy enough to stain. Fake quotes. Doctored photos. Old rumors dressed up as new truth. And the source? Easy to trace. A boutique PR firm in Atlanta. The same firm Jameson used to whitewash Dad's malpractice case into some tragic hero narrative. I exhaled slow. Let the anger move through me and pass. Jameson wasn't smart. He was predictable. And I was ready. I didn't panic, didn't post, didn't plead. I opened the press package Maya and I had prepared weeks ago. The one we made when I stopped playing defense. The next morning, as Charleston stretched into consciousness, we released one post. No drama, no hashtags, just facts. Certified court appointment records, letters of endorsement from senior judges, media profiles of my work in public interest law, housing reform, juvenile justice, and at the top, in bold, facts are stubborn things. John Adams. The response was immediate. By noon, major news outlets had picked it up. Talk radio lit up. Not against me. Against him. Columnists called it pathetic. Former colleagues spoke out. Unsolicited, fierce, loyal. Families I'd helped. In court. Public defenders I'd stood beside. Even old law professors came forward. And Jameson? His PR firm dropped him. Donors vanished. Speaking invites rescinded. The Marins tried their usual routine. Polite denial, distant statements, quiet retreat. But not this time. This time, their silence was part of the crime. They hadn't just let me fall. They helped push. Now they could all stand together at the edge of the crater. That afternoon, after the family brunch was quietly canceled, I walked the estate grounds alone. The sky above was a furious shade of blue, streaked, with clouds like torn paper. Even the weather couldn't decide whether to mourn or rejoice. I wandered through rose gardens, past koi ponds and imported statues, all the decorations meant to convince the world we were better than we were. When I reached the edge of the wide front lawn, I paused, letting the breeze tug a few strands of hair loose from my braid. It was cool, grounding. Then I heard footsteps behind me, soft, hesitant. I turned. Catherine. She wasn't dressed like a bride anymore. No silk, no sparkle, no illusion. Just jeans, a simple blouse, and a face scrubbed clean of pretense. She walked. Across the grass slowly, the space between us shrinking one quiet step at a time. When she reached me, she didn't speak. She simply held out her hand. Not as apology, not with pity, but with something stronger. Solidarity. I looked at it for a beat, then took it. Her grip was firm, steady, not as a stranger, not as an enemy, as something else entirely. The sun was just beginning to sink beneath the horizon when Catherine and I finally let go. She turned back toward the house, her shoulders squared, her steps purposeful. Lighter, straighter. Walking a path I knew Jameson would never be able to follow. I lingered a moment longer. The wind stirred the edge of my jacket, and something inside me shifted, quietly, fully. The world no longer felt borrowed. It felt like mine. The next few days came in slow, predictable waves. Jameson's fall wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no grand spectacle. It unraveled behind doors, tense meetings, whispered warnings, reputations slipping out from under him like wet stone. The invitations stopped. The medical boards distanced themselves. His once bright future dulled. In real time, and for once the Marins couldn't spin fast enough. The cracks in their porcelain story widened, then split. The calls trickled in, second cousins, distant aunts, old family friends, each one trying to find the right tone, sympathetic, yet detached. I always believed in you, Lauren. We knew you were special. You've always been stronger than the rest of us. Too little. Too late. I answered none of them, because truth had done what no argument ever could. It stood. And that was enough. I turned my focus to the life I'd built outside of their shadows. The federal judgeship I'd been offered, untouchable, unspillable, waited on my desk. A position earned with long nights, impossible cases, and a stubborn belief that I didn't need their approval to be worthy. I signed the acceptance letter with a steady hand. 1 year later, on a warm spring evening, I stood at the entrance of the Charleston Community Foundation's gala, an event I helped create. Not for clout, not for show, but for the neighborhoods that believed in me before anyone else ever did. The air buzzed. Laughter, conversation, the sweet scent of jasmine drifting on the breeze. Inside the ballroom, there were no gilded frames. No performances for social capital. Just people rebuilding what mattered. As I moved through the room, I saw familiar faces. Not from blood, but from battle. Public defenders, organizers, young lawyers who once sat in courtrooms with wide eyes and steady hearts. I wore a simple black gown, no designer tag, no glittering jewels, just one thing around my neck. My grandfather's. Pendant Lady Justice, aged and gleaming, resting quietly below my collarbone. It wasn't just an heirloom anymore. It was armor. A vow that no one else would ever define me again. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself near the wide bay windows overlooking the harbor. The lights shimmered across the water, fractured and beautiful. I touched the pendant, lightly, feeling its weight against my skin. They tried to erase me from the story, I whispered. A small smile curved my lips. I wrote a better one instead. I stayed there a while, breathing in the salt air, the soft hum of joy behind me, the solid presence of a life no one else had written for me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest victory of all. What would you have done if your family tried to write you out? Would you have fought for your name, or walked away? Sometimes the deepest scars don't come from strangers. They come from the ones who should have loved us first. Lauren's story is a reminder. When they try to erase you, you can still pick up the pen and write your own ending, stronger, freer, and fully your own. Have you ever faced something like this? Would you have stayed quiet or stood up? Tell us in the comments. I read everyone. And if you believe in stories of truth, resilience, and reclaiming your place, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's so much more ahead. You won't want to miss it.